So we're continuing in the Aqeedah of Sanusi, rahimahullah ta'ala. And now we have reached where he wants to argue for the ma'ani attributes, the existential attributes. And he says, may Allah have mercy on him, وأما برهان وجوب اتصافه تعالى بالقدرة والإرادة والعلم والحياة. As for the argument for the necessity of his being attributed with power, will, knowledge, and life, exalted is he, فَلِأَنَّهُ لَوْ انْتَفَى شَيْءٌ مِنْهَا لَمَا وُجِدَ شَيْءٌ مِنَ الْحَوَادِثِ. It is because had any one of those been negated, then nothing of created things would have existed. Yep, I think that's clear for you. Had he not been attributed with any of those four that are mentioned here, power, will, knowledge, and life, then nothing of the creations would exist. His power is his attribute by which he brings creations into being from nothingness. His will is his attribute by which he makes them one way or another. And they happen according to his knowledge. And his being attributed with power and will and knowledge proves that he is alive. So had he not been attributed with any of those attributes, then none of the creations would exist. If you have a question, go ahead and ask. He says, وَأَمَّا بُرْهَانُ وُجُوبِ السَّمْعِ لَهُ تَعَالَى وَالْبَصَرِ وَالْكَلَامِ. And as for the argument for the necessity of hearing for him, exalted is he, and sight and speech, فَالْكِتَابُ وَالسُّنَّةُ وَالْإِجْمَاعُ. It is the book and the sunnah and the consensus. So that's interesting, because that's for all the attributes. The ones that he mentioned have that same argument, that same evidence. The book, the sunnah, the consensus. Why did he mention that here and he didn't mention it right above? He says, وَأَيْضًا لَوْ لَمْ يَتَّصِفْ بِهَا لَزِمَ أَنْ يَتَّصِفَ بِأَضْدَادِهَا. He said, and also, had he not been attributed with them, then it is necessary that he would be attributed with their opposites. That's true. That's blindness and deafness and dumbness. And that's still, though, true for the first four. Had he not been attributed with these, he would have been attributed with their opposites: weakness and being forced and ignorance and death. So here, up till here, what he offered as the arguments for hearing, sight, and speech are arguments for power, will, knowledge, and life. He says, وَهِيَ نَقَائِص. The opposites of those attributes are deficiencies. وَالنَّقْصُ عَلَيْهِ تَعَالَى مُحَالٌ. And deficiency for him, exalted as he, is impossible. It says here imperfection. Those opposites are imperfections, and imperfection for him, exalted as he, is impossible. Okay. Well, then you might have a question. You might say, okay, he said that the argument for hearing and sight and speech is that they are confirmed in the book and the sunnah and the consensus. Well, that's true for the first four up here. And he said also that had he not been attributed with hearing, sight, and speech, he would be attributed with their opposites, which are deficiencies, and deficiency is impossible for him, exalted is he. But that's also true about these first four. Had he not been attributed with them, he'd be attributed with their opposites, and their opposites are imperfections, and imperfection is impossible to attribute to him. So then you might say, so is what's the argument up here true for the ones that are down there? These first four, he said, their argument is that had they been negated, then nothing of the creations would exist. Is this true for hearing, sight, and speech? Had they been negated, then none of the creations would exist? Yeah, that is true. So then you might say, why is he separating them? Why didn't he mention all of them together and give them all the same argument? So the answer is, Alhamdulillah, that some of the attributes of Allah are known to us by His doings. And some of the attributes of Allah are known to us by His perfection. Some of His attributes are known by His doings and some are known by His perfection. But that overlaps, because the ones that are known by His doings are also known by His perfection. So what's known by His doings? These first four. Meaning, here we are, creatures on the earth. We never saw God. How are we so sure that there is a God? We are so sure that there is a God because of all the things around us that are existing. We say there must be a God because the world exists. So that's another way of saying this world is a doing of God. So we say some of His attributes are proven by His doings. So because this world exists, we're going to say God has power to create, and God has will to do whatever He willed to do, and God has knowledge, and everything happens as He knew it would happen. And because He has power and will and knowledge, then He is for sure alive without a body or a soul. And so His doings proved these attributes. And that's the meaning of all of this talk here when Sanusi, rahimahullah, said, as for the argument for the necessity of His being attributed with power, will, knowledge, and life, it is because had any one of those been negated, then nothing of the created things would have existed. Yani, these are the attributes that are known by His doings. In other words, and some of His attributes are known by the necessity of His perfection. Meaning, okay, we confirm that He's alive. So if He's alive, then He can see or He's blind. He can hear or He's deaf. He can speak or He's mute. Because once you say something is alive, then other meanings come. Yani, life itself has a meaning. So He's alive. So then He can hear or He's deaf, and He can see or He's blind, and He can speak or He's mute. So we're going to say He can hear and He can see and He can speak because He's perfect. These are the attributes of perfection for the one who is alive. Yani, the opposites of those are imperfections, and imperfection is impossible to be His attribute. If you have any question, go ahead, please. He says here, rahimahullah, وأما برهان كون فعل الممكنات أو تركها جائزا في حقه تعالى. And concerning the argument that doing anything possible or leaving it undone is valid concerning Him, exalted is He, What's the argument for that? That doing anything possible is valid for him, or leaving it undone, meaning not creating it, is valid for him. فلأنه لو وجب عليه تعالى شيء منها عقلا أو استحال عقلا لانقلب الممكن واجبا أو مستحيلا وذلك لا يعقل. It is that had doing anything been necessary for him intellectually, or had doing anything been impossible for him intellectually, then the possibility, which is what God can do, because God can do anything possible, He can create anything possible. Had doing for anything for God been necessary, or had doing anything for God been impossible, then the possibility is what God really, which is what God really does. The possibility, which is what God really does, He creates possibilities. It would have turned into a necessity or an impossibility, and that is implausible. That is irrational. What does that mean? Well, you know already, you should know that there are three mental judgments, and you should know their definitions. The intellectual necessity is what the mind cannot conceive its non existence, that which must exist to the mind. So then it's not a possibility. A possibility doesn't have to exist. What is necessary to the mind is God's existence and His attributes. The existence of God and His attributes is what is necessary to the mind. So, had doing anything been necessary for Allah, then the done thing of God would have been a necessity. And that's impossible because God's done thing has a beginning. And what is necessary in existence, what has a necessary existence, does not have a beginning. And what is impossible to the sound mind is what the mind does not accept its existence. So, had God's done thing been impossible, then it would not have been a done thing because it wouldn't have been able to come into existence. So, it must be valid that God can do anything possible or leave anything possible undone, because otherwise doing something would have been necessary for God, and that's impossible in itself, that it's necessary that God would do something. Or doing something would have been impossible for God, and that's impossible in itself, that it's impossible that God could do something. Therefore, the judgment of the sound mind is that it is valid that God can do anything possible or leave it undone. I think that's clear. Feel free, please, if you have a question. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad that's clear. So Imam An-Nasafi now, he's done for now with the attributes of Allah. But he will come back to recap.